Shalom, friends of Schechter. I want to welcome you very much to this evening, this day, this morning, this afternoon's program, which is zooming into Shavuot and Yom Yerushalayim. We are thrilled to have with us Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, who will start, Professor Doron Bar, the Israel Land of Israel Studies, to continue, who will be followed by Sarah Schwartz, who is the new dean of the Schechter Institutes. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the team and send this over to Rabbi Matt Berkowitz. Bevakasha.
Thank you so much, Josh. Bruchim habayim. I want to say welcome to all of you who have joined this remarkable Beit Midrash, our virtual Beit Midrash. As we zoom into Shavuot, I want to thank Josh for all of his logistical work and support behind the scenes and front and center. We thank you so much, Josh, for everything you do to make it all go so smoothly. And of course, I want to thank our Schechter faculty members, very distinguished faculty members that have joined us for this Zoom into Shavuot. Professor Doron Bar, who is our president emeritus of Machon Schechter of our graduate school and professor of Land of Israel Studies. His session is devoted to marking Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, which begins tonight in Jerusalem and continues tomorrow. And then, of course, our very beloved professor, Dr. Sarah Schwartz, professor of Bible, who is dean of the Schechter Institutes and who will teach on the Ten Commandments and the covenant with God as Josh introduced. I want to say that it's quite special. I am now taking this Zoom in the States, in New Jersey specifically, after having been on a week-and-a-half tour for the Schechter Institute, spreading the word of everything that we are doing on the ground in Israel with our dear president, Professor Rabbi David Galinkin. So without further ado, I want to jump into my chosen topic, and that is coercive consent, ? Understanding the moment of revelation at Sinai through the eyes of Midrash. And what I want to do over the course of these 30 minutes is I want to explore the moment of Ma'amad Har Sinai, the moment of revelation at Sinai, to understand clearly if this is a moment of love and embrace, or is this more appropriately described as a moment of fear and trembling? And very specifically, how does the world of Midrash filter this experience of divine encounter? So what I want to do is I want to begin with the text itself, and then we're going to take a look at an arc of Midrashim, which will take us between the polar extremes of fear and moving slowly in the direction of love and embrace. So let's turn to the original text of Exodus 19, verses 1 through 17. And I also want to say, you see, Josh has kindly shared my source sheet with you. At the end of my session, what I will do is I will put these sources in the chat, and you can take them right off the chat, use them, share them, bring them to your communities for Shavuot. I would love for these to be spread far and wide. So let's take a look at that moment of Sinai, Exodus 19. And what do we read there? On the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain, and Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you will say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you will speak to the children of Israel." Moses came and summoned the elders of the people. All the people answered as one, saying, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and warn them to stay pure. You will set bounds. Whoever touches the mountain will be put to death." Moses came down the mountain and warned the people to stay pure. Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud. All the people trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. So what are we to make of the pshat, the literal sense of this text from Exodus 19, especially as it relates to the emotions that are conveyed? I would argue that we want to believe this is a moment of loving embrace of the Israelites as they encounter God in the moment of revelation with a capital R. And yet it could be read both ways, especially when we look at the verse, Atem ra'item asher asiti leMitzrayim, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. Okay, this can be read in a tone of love, and it can also be read in a tone of fear, right? The Israelites have seen how the Egyptians have been punished because of their intransigence in letting the Israelites free, and God bringing the 10 plagues upon the Egyptians, right? So as to say, if the Israelites do not behave, right, if they become intransigent, that perhaps God will bring, right, a hand of judgment upon us in the same way. So that verse itself, the beginning of that verse, could be understood as a threat. But of course, we have the continuation of the verse where it says, "Ve'asa etchem al kanfei nisharim, ve'avi etchem elai." And I will bring you to me on eagle's wings. And how is it that an eagle carries its young? An eagle carries its young on top of its wings, so that if shot from below, it's going to be the eagle itself that's injured as the eagle protects its young, right? So there we've got this loving embrace. And again, the pendulum swings back and forth as we look at the literal sense of what it is that we have here. Of course, the fact that we have the Vayehi kolot uvrakim, thunder and lightning in this moment, the anan kaved alahar, and this dark cloud that's descending on the mountain, right? This also creates for a very, very tense moment for us as we encounter God in all of God's intimacy. So let's turn to the first midrash, which comes to us from Masechet Shabbat, Tractate Shabbat 88a, a very, very famous midrash that is triggered by the very end of the excerpt that I have brought from Exodus 19. At the very end, we read, "Vayityatzvu betachtit hahar," that the Israelites were standing, or they were deeply rooted at the foot of the mountain. Yet, what it is that triggers this midrash is not the translation that we see before us. Remember, every translation is a commentary, but rather its sensitivity to the literal word that we have there, which is bitachtit hahar, that the Israelites were rooted under the mountain. And so what midrashic direction do the rabbis take us in? In source 2, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Rabbi Avdimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa said, this teaches that the Holy One held the mountain over them like an overturned barrel and told them, if you accept Torah, well and good. Otherwise, you will be buried right here. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, this furnishes a powerful disclaimer regarding the acceptance of Torah. Rashi, so if God arraigns them demanding, why have you failed to observe that which you accepted, they can respond that the acceptance was coerced. So what is the image, the very, very stark image that we're given here? Literally that God uprooted Mount Sinai, held Mount Sinai over their heads, right? And says to them, if you accept Torah, all good, right? Otherwise, this will be your burial spot. To what extent do the Israelites have free choice in all of this? Right? They are literally approached. This is sort of a very, very Al Pacino reading of the text where, right, take it or leave it, but if you leave it, it's not going to be good for you, right? So we have this sense of absolute religious coercion going on here. The Israelites, it seems, do not have a choice. They're being presented with this Torah, and the only viable avenue they have is acceptance of that Torah. And so Rashi's insertion here, so that if God arraigns them, demanding, why have you failed to accept that which you accepted? The people themselves can respond, we did not accept this willingly, right? This was forced upon us. So the midrash that we are given here in Tractate Shabbat is a very, very stark snapshot of what it is that the Israelites experienced in that very, very fateful and liminal moment, right? Utter fear. Now I want to turn to the next source from Sifrei Bamidbar that you see here, Sifrei Numbers 115. And what do we read here in this midrash? Thus you will be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God, I, the Lord your God. Why is the Exodus mentioned in connection with each and every mitzvah? A parable, what is this like? Like a king whose friend's son was taken captive. When he redeemed him, he did not redeem him as a free man, but as a slave. So that if the king issues decrees and the son resists, he can say to him, you are my slave. When they came into the city, the king instructed him, put on my sandals on my feet, carry my garments before me to the bathhouse. The friend's son started pulling away. He then produced the deed and said to him, you are my slave. Similarly, when the Holy One redeemed the seed of Abraham, God did not redeem them as a free people, but as slaves. So that if God issues decrees and they resist, God can say to them, you are my slaves. When they emerged into the desert, he issued some minor mitzvot, some major mitzvot. Israel started pulling away. God then said to them, you are my slaves. It is on this condition that I redeemed you, that I will issue decrees and you will obey. So in so many ways, this particular midrash turns the idea of Yitziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt, on its head. One would think that we were released to be entirely free, but not so fast. According to this particular midrash, it seems that we owe something very, very dear to God. And the transition that we make coming out of Egypt is one in which we were Ovdei Paro, we were slaves to Pharaoh, and now we become Ovdei Hashem, we become servants of God. This is the qualitative difference, right? When we cross the Reed Sea. We transform ourselves from being servants of Pharaoh to becoming servants of God. And it's clear from the tone of this particular midrash, right, that the understanding is that it's this particular change of status. Not that we are entirely free, right, but our freedom is through becoming servants of God, right, of the divine judge with a capital D and a capital J. We turn now to Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, Bachodesh. This is source number 4. And what do we read here? I, the Lord, am your God. Why were the 10 commandments not proclaimed at the beginning of Torah? A parable, what is this like? Like a human king who entered a province and said to the people, shall I reign over you? They replied, have you conferred upon us any benefit that you should reign over us? What did he do then? He built the city wall for them. He brought in the water supply for them. He fought their battles. Then he said to them, shall I reign over you? They replied, yes, yes. Similarly, God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, parted the sea for them, sent down the manna, brought them water, brought quails, fought the battle against Amalek. And then God said to them, shall I reign over you? They replied, yes, yes. Now we enter the territory, the midrashic territory of quid pro quo. In order for God to expect the loyalty of the people need to see that they are being given a benefit or a number of benefits from God's rule. God understands this entirely. And so God goes on, right? We're told here, God not only brings them out of Egypt, but parts the sea for them, sends down manna, brings them water, quails, fought the battle against Amalek. And then it's justified to expect loyalty from this people. Already, the
AI.
pendulum is
They probably have
swinging
a booth
more
there.
in the
Right,
direction of the people and the expectation that the people have of their God. We turn
I'll go check.
to
Nan is very happy.
source number 5,
Where?
Schechter Rabati, Aseret HaDibrot, and we read there the following. God went first to the children of Esav. God said to them, "Will you accept the Torah?" They replied, "Master of the universe, what is written in it?" God said to them, "You will not murder." They said to God, "Our father promised us our very existence would depend upon the sword, as it is written, by your sword you will live." So we cannot accept the Torah. Then God went to the children of Ammon and Moab. God said to them, "Will you accept Torah?" They replied, "Master of the universe, what is written in it?" God said, "You will not commit adultery." They said to God, "Our very existence derives from adultery." That is what is implied by the verse. Thus the 2 daughters of Lot came to be with child by their father. So we cannot accept Torah. Then God went to the children of Ishmael. God said to them, "Will you accept Torah?" They replied, "Master of the universe, what is written in it?" God said, "You will not steal." They said to God, "Our very existence derives from theft and robbery." That is what is implied by the verse, "He will be a wild ass of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him." So we cannot accept Torah. Then God came to Israel. They said, "Na'aseh v'nishma." We will do and we will hear. Right, a very, very striking midrash, right, and one which I am sure is common and known to many of you, but this midrash itself raises so many questions. The whole idea of God shopping Torah around to a number of different nations, right? First to the children of Esav, to Ammon, Moab, right, to Bnei Ishmael, and then finally God coming to Israel. Why is it that Israel is the last choice here? Granted, right, ultimately we come to the particular punchline of this midrash. Obviously, the appeal, the distinct appeal of this midrash is that there is a sense of choice on the part of the people. The people are given the option, and what do the people do? People jump with enthusiasm to accept this gift of Torah. And they say, "We will do and we will hear," which is often understood as we will jump to act, we will embrace this with a whole heart, and only afterwards will we do our due diligence and understand, meaning we will learn the details of this revelation in and out, right? But as an act of love, we are going to embrace it immediately. It seems, however, this midrash was not enough for the rabbis. And so what did the rabbis do? The rabbis wanted to scour all of Tanakh, looking for the particular moment in which the Israelites lovingly embrace Torah with a full heart and a full soul. So we return to Tractate Shabbat, Masechet Shabbat from the Babylonian Talmud, and we have this very, very powerful source. This is number 6, in which we are taught the following. Rava said, "Nevertheless, they reaffirmed its acceptance in the days of Achashverosh. As it is written, the Jews confirmed and accepted." They confirmed that which they had already accepted. So what's going on in Rava's teaching here? What's going on in this particular window into the text? What is Rava doing here? So interestingly enough, Rava latches his particular hermeneutic, his reading of Ma'amad Har Sinai, of the revelation at Sinai, on Megillat Esther, on the scroll of Esther. He deliberately goes to this moment of Jewish history, ironically enough, and takes the pasuk, the verse, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. The Jews confirmed and accepted. In the context of Megillat Esther, it refers to all of the laws related to the observance of Purim that were decreed upon the community by Mordechai. However, the rabbis lift this out of its context, and they say that it's not solely limited to the laws of Purim, but what does this refer to? It refers to revelation at Sinai. And why is this so striking? It's so important because who is the character that is explicitly missing from the scroll of Esther? It's none other than God. We do not see God explicitly mentioned anywhere in the scroll of Esther, right? Although the rabbis like to read midrashically that when we see appearances of Hamelech, right, of the king, it's referring to the King of Kings. It is referring to God. But explicitly, we do not see God's name anywhere in the text. I find it fascinating that what the rabbis do is they go to a period of Jewish history around the 4th century BCE in which God is no longer an immanent presence, as compared to what it is that we experience at Revelation at Sinai, Exodus chapters 19 and 20. God there is immanent. God there is present with a capital P. And yet, what do they do in their wisdom? They go to a time in which we are experiencing Hester Panim, in which we are experiencing God's absence. And it's only in the time of experiencing God's absence that the Israelites can wholeheartedly feel a sense of closeness to God. Ironically, right? We would think that it would go in the opposite direction. And yet the rabbis are saying, no, wait a moment. It's because there is distance from that moment of revelation that the Israelites can now accept Torah willingly and lovingly in a time in which it's not so different from the one that we find ourselves into today. I think a beautiful metaphor for this is the parent-child relationship. When a child is under the roof of a parent's home, oftentimes it is difficult, right, for a child to accept the parent's authority and the parent's wisdom. And so it is only after the child leaves home and goes out to discover, right, his or her own essence, right, that the child can then come back and reflect on the wisdom that was learned from the parent. And I believe what the rabbis are teaching, what Rava is teaching in this particular midrash from Masechet Shabbat, is precisely that aspect. It's this aspect, this notion that we have to be in a place where we have some distance in order to fully realize our freedom and in order to fully accept the authority of God. Two final sources that I want to share with you as we come to the finish line of my shiur, of my lesson. The first is Bernard Levinson, who writes in the Jewish political tradition the following: the literary structure of the Decalogue, which we'll learn more from Dr. Sarah Schwartz, the literary structure is remarkable. In the divine proclamation of the covenant, God speaking as I directly addresses each Israelite as thou, ungrammatically using the intimate singular form rather than the expected plural. Each addressee thereby knows himself or herself to be directly addressed by God. Within the narrative structure, each former slave who previously lacked all sense of history and community acquires an I at Sinai. The transformation of the slave into a person in narrative terms points to the direct address as requiring a personal response, the creation of the moral self on the part of the reader or the hearer. That is what's so critical about the notion of Aseret HaDibrot, that we feel as if we are being personally addressed. And in that moment of being personally addressed, we can also personally wrap our hands around that experience of revelation willingly and lovingly. And the final poem that I want to share with you is a very, very beautiful poem by Merlfeld and Rachel Adler entitled We All Stood Together. And in truth, I dedicate this piece. I know the Jewish Theological Seminary just celebrated its commencement exercises. And as part of that celebration, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of women in the rabbinate. So it's all to all of those women in the rabbinate that I want to dedicate this particular piece. Merlfeld and Rachel Adler wrote, "My brother and I were at Sinai. He kept a journal of what he saw, of what he heard, of what it all meant to him. I wish I had such a record of what happened to me there. It seems like every time I want to write, I can't. I'm always holding a baby, one of my own or one for a friend, always holding a baby, so my hands are never free to write things down. And then as time passes, the particulars, the hard data, the who, what, when, where, why slip away from me. And all I'm left with is the feeling. But the feelings are just sounds, the vowel barking of a mute. My brother is so sure of what he heard. After all, he's got a record of it, consonant after consonant after consonant. If we remembered it together, we could recreate holy time, sparks flying. So with that, I want to wish us all a Chag Shavuot Sameach, and may this Shavuot be a moment in which we are able to not only remember Ma'amad Har Sinai together, not only remember the moment of revelation together, but also embrace that moment of revelation and move ourselves from embracing Torah with fear to embracing Torah wholeheartedly with a sense of love and a true sense of enthusiasm. I want to say Chag Sameach to all of you. And I want to hand everything back to Josh. As I said, I will put the source sheets in the chat so that you can all take advantage of downloading those pieces and enjoying them more after our Zoom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Berkowitz. Thank you very much. I would like to find Professor Doron Bar.
Hi, I'm here. Hello.
Okay. Doron is a professor, Land of Israel Studies, focusing on Jerusalem and the rest of the country, as well as the former president of the Schechter Institute. Professor Bar, bevakasha, let's go.
Okay, let's first see if the presentation works. And is it moving? Does it work? Good, wonderful. Okay, so hi everybody, shalom to all of you. And it's a pleasure and honor to be here. As you can see from my presentation, I will speak this evening about two very important events that happened in 1967, Yom Yerushalayim, and the Six-Day War, of course, and the connection between the two, and that is the Western Wall. And I'm taking you back exactly 58 years ago to what happened in the country, what happened in Jerusalem in Kafchet, in Iyar of that year, 7th of June, 1967, during the middle of the Six-Day War. And you can read from the Haaretz newspaper that it is not only all Jerusalem, not only the West Bank, but also the Gaza Strip and Sinai that are now in the hands of Israel. You can see also a picture of Moshe Dayan, the Minister of Defense, who is standing next to the Western Wall, and he is stating, we will not be separated anymore from our holy places. So this is a major event, a major change in the history of Jerusalem, the unification of Jerusalem during that war, and the fact that since 1967, 6th June 1967, Jerusalem was under the hands of the State of Israel. Now, look what happened a few days later. On June 14th, Vav Benisan of that year, more than 2,000 visitors, Jews, visited during the Feast of Shavuot, Chag HaShavuot of that year. The newspaper, Hatzofeh, Ton Hatzofeh, is mentioning that more than 200,000 people visited the Western Wall of that year. By the way, it means that 10% of the population of Israel visited the Kotel during that specific day. And by the way, once in a while, I'll meet people who say to me, yeah, I remember that day. Yeah, I was a small kid. Yes, my father took me. So many people visited the Western Wall during these particular days, and of course during the weeks later on. So my talk today will be devoted to what happened in the Western Wall after 1967. By the way, I'll be more than happy to share with you my presentations. If you want to use it, as you will see, I will present many original old photos of the Western Wall and some plans and some maps. So if you want to have this presentation, please write us and we'll send you it later on. So my talk today will be leaning on my book on the subject. As you can see, I published quite recently, a few years ago, a book about the Western Wall after 1967. It was published both in Hebrew and in English. In Hebrew, it is called Kedusha Be'en HaSe'ara, Holiness Under the Eye of the Storm. And it's the Western Wall between Jewishness and Israeliness, 1967 to the year 2000. And in English, the Western Wall, the dispute over Israel's holiest Jewish site, and again, 1967 to the year 2000.
Doron, we have put this up on the
Great.
chat. So if anybody wants the link, it is now on the chat.
Great. So the book in English was published under Brill Publishing House, and the Hebrew one was published in Magnus Publishing House. So if you want, you can go there and have the book. I'm sure that all of you know the place, know the Western Wall, but in any case, I'm showing you two maps. The map on the left is a map of Jerusalem, the entire Jerusalem, and more specifically, we can see, of course, the map of the old city, and the arrow goes to the Western Wall Plaza. And of course, in order to understand this major moment that happened in 1967, I bring you back to antiquity and to the fact that we don't know much about the history of the Temple Mount. We don't know much about the way the temple looked like in antiquity during the First Temple period. We know a little bit more about the appearance of the temple during the Second Temple period. And here you can see the famous model that now is located next to the Israel Museum, and the size of Jerusalem of that time, and the importance, of course, of the temple. We know, of course, that it was Herod the Great who expanded the area of the temple and built an artificial mountain in Jerusalem of that time, Har HaBayit, that we know, of course. And this reconstruction of the Temple Mount shows you the exact location of what we call today the Western Wall. I'm pointing to this section of the Western Wall, 500 meters, compared to what we call today the Western Wall, which is around 17 meters or 18 meters from one side to the other. Unfortunately, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans at the end of the Great Revolt against Romans. And during the year 70 CE, it was not only Jerusalem that was destroyed, but also the Temple Mount, and you can see this pile of stones that was found by archaeologists after 1967. They decided to leave it as they found it, and these are, of course, the stones that were few years earlier, they were part of the Western Wall, and part of the destruction of the temple, they threw the stones to the street below. So since then, since the year 70, when less and less Jews lived in Eretz Israel, we know very little about the custom of pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The first important pilgrim, Jewish pilgrim, who visited Jerusalem and who describes a visit to the Western Wall is the famous Rabbi Binyamin of Tudela, this famous traveler who came during the 12th century from northern Spain to Jerusalem. He is the first one, he is one of the first to mention that the Western Wall is an important site of veneration and prayer. We don't know exactly which part of the Western Wall he was referring, but later on, in these wonderful drawings that you see in front of you, gradually, this section of the Western Wall became the important part, became the main pilgrimage site of the Jews of Jerusalem, of Eretz Israel, and of course the Jews of the diaspora who came to visit Jerusalem. We can see that it was a really small area. The area in front of the Western Wall was not more than 3-4 meters wide and like 20 meters from the north to the south. And in order to get closer to the Western Wall, you had to go by the houses of the Mughrabian quarter. These were Arabs who were living in front of the Western Wall. This is a very important map that I show you, that I found in one of the archives in Israel, which shows you the location of the Western Wall Plaza and how small was it. As I told you, not more than 3-4 meters wide and 28-30 meters from one side to the other. And in order to reach the Western Wall Plaza, you had to pass through these houses of the Arabs. But this was the main pilgrimage site of the Jews of Jerusalem. It was not a synagogue. The synagogues of Jerusalem were in the Jewish quarter, in the new neighborhoods of Jerusalem, outside of the walls. But this was a special place of veneration, especially during Tisha B'Av, when many of the Jews came to visit this area. We have wonderful photos of the way to the Kotel during this period, and it shows you that many Jews living in Jerusalem and outside of Jerusalem frequented the Western Wall every year. But then came 1948, and during the War of Independence, the War of 1948, Jerusalem was divided into two parts. This wonderful map that I show you is a map of Jerusalem from the 60s. And what is very clear in this map is that we have a border. I'm showing you now the border which divides the two parts of Jerusalem. And you can see very clearly that the old city, with all the Jewish holy places, all the important Jewish places, Rachel's tomb and the cave of Machpelah and the rest of the tombs of the righteous, all of them were on the other side of the border, including, of course, the old city with the Western Wall that is located very far from the Jews of the state of Israel. So for the next 19 years, the Jews were detached from that part of the country and from the Western Wall. But then, of course, came 1967, and the 6-Day War, and the situation in the entire country changed enormously, including, of course, what happened in Jerusalem and what happened in the Old City. Jerusalem was united, and during the third day of the war, Jerusalem, the Old City, were under the custody of the IDF. Here I'm showing you the very famous pictures, photos that we have from that moment, from this particular moment, the excitement of the soldiers who came for the first time to visit the place, and of course, many rabbis, politicians. The place changed dramatically. One of the changes that happened immediately after the war, 4 days after the end of the 6-Day War, was the decision to demolish the houses of the Mugrabin quarter. This plan on the right, the upper part of the right, which I show you, shows what, again, I found in one of the archives in Israel. This is a plan of the demolishing of the Mugrabin houses. There were something like 150 houses located in front of the Western Wall, and it was decided to destroy them, to demolish them, in order to make space for the many, many Jews, many, many pilgrims who were expected to visit the area during the Feast of Shavuot, as I showed you at the beginning of my presentations. And indeed, thousands and thousands of Jews crossed the line and came to visit the Western Wall during that time. So now we have a huge plaza, and this is one of the best pictures that I like from that period. You can see that it was taken at the beginning of July 1967. So it means that it was taken few days after the end of the war. And this is a very exciting moment in the history of the Western Wall, because what you can see very clearly in front of you is that everyone is here. You can see very clearly that these are men and women, women and men who are dancing together. You can see very clearly religious people, but secular people that were drawn to visit the place. You can see old people and young people. This is a very important moment in the history of the Western Wall that will be never again. It will happen never again, because quite quickly the Ministry of Religious Affairs took over the area, and he was since then responsible for what was happening in the Western Wall, the Western Wall Plaza, during the following years. For example, the decision that the Western Wall Plaza and the Western Wall will be a kind of a synagogue. You can see the title, it's written here, synagogue, Beit HaKnesset of the Western Wall. Now, my book, my 4 chapters in the book are dealing with few aspects of the history of the Western Wall. One of them is directed towards the issue of archaeology in the Western Wall. Who has the right to dig beneath the Western Wall and beneath the area of the Western Wall? It was highly debated issue. Another issue, and you can see it on the lower part of the right part of the presentation, you can see the issue of the non-architecture of the Western Wall. This was a plan that was chosen by the government of Israel, by the very famous architect Moshe Sfadia. Many of you know the name, of course, and he was commissioned in 1973 to have a plan to replan the Western Wall. And as you know, nothing happened. In the upper part, in the upper corner of my presentation, you can see another chapter, another picture, and that is the issue of the question of the Israeli background of the Western Wall. A question that I always ask my students when I teach these issues. I ask them, do you remember if there is an Israeli flag at the plaza? Can you remember if there is an Israeli flag at the Western Wall Plaza? Most of the Israelis, most of my students say no, there is no flag. But in reality, let me mention that there is a huge flag at the middle of the plaza, but most of the Israelis connect the place with its Jewish background and not its Israeli background. But in reality, we have many ceremonies next to the Western Wall. For example, the opening ceremony of the Memorial Day for the Fallen Soldiers, which takes place in front of the Western Wall. The fourth chapter is devoted to the question of who owns the Western Wall, and the question of the mechitza. This mechitza, the dividing wall that was located at the Western Wall Plaza few weeks after the end of the war by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and since then it grew higher, and there was a huge debate among the Israelis after the war, who has the right to say what to do and what not to do in the Western Wall. I'm starting now with archaeology, which is very, very important. And you can see in this map that I show you that the area of the Western Wall, this is the Western Wall, the area of the Western Wall was divided between a very famous professor, Professor Benjamin Mazar from the Hebrew University, who excavated south and west of the Temple Mount. And I'm showing you that the Ministry of Religious Affairs was now digging beneath the houses of the Muslim quarter in order to make what we know today as the Western Wall Tunnel. I guess that many of you visited the place and you know the place, and it happened right after the Six-Day War. This was Benjamin Mazar's excavations, were the first Israeli excavations to be done after the war. And reality, let me explain to you that before 1967, there were hardly any major archaeological excavations in Jerusalem. The Israelis came and they started to excavate the area, and the decision was that the first dig will be beneath these massive walls of the Temple Mount. The desire of Benjamin Mazar, you can see here, this is Benjamin Mazar, and he is hosting the Prime Minister, Levi Eshkol. It's 1968. So his desire, Benjamin Mazar's desire, was to find the remains of our ancestors, to be connected to our ancestors. We are not new here in the old city. We have our roots, the people said. And indeed, during the excavations, Benjamin Mazar found lots of amazing remains. For example, what we call today the Hulda gate and the Hulda staircase, south of the Western Wall. As I told you, the Ministry of Religious Affairs excavated north of the Western Wall Plaza. The desire during the time was to expose the entire length of the Western Wall and the northern wall of the Temple Mount. And this is another map that I found in one of the archives. Someone suggested, let's demolish the houses of the Muslim quarter. In that way, we will expose the other sections of the walls of the Temple Mount. It never happened, and gradually the Ministry of Religious Affairs started to excavate this tunnel beneath the houses of the Muslim quarter, and this place was turned into a major touristic site in Jerusalem. And you can see the current pictures of the Western Wall tunnel today, of course. I've mentioned the issue of architecture in the Western Wall, and these two maps tells us the story. For years and years and years, in front of the Western Wall, there was this old neighborhood, old Arab neighborhood of the Mughrabians. And then it was decided to destroy these houses. And now we have a huge plaza in front of the Western Wall. Before 1948, not more than a few meters. Now we have something like 1 hectare of huge plaza, and now we have to develop it. Now we have to plan it. Now we have to find a solution, what to do with this area and how to make it work architecturally. This was the first plan. It was made, as you can see here on the side, you can see it was made on July 20th, 1967. It was made by Yosef Schenberger, the architect of the Ministry of Religious Affairs. And unfortunately, this is the plan that is still today. You can see very clearly that the Western Wall Plaza is divided into 2 sections: the prayer plaza and the place when others are gathered, Chavat HaItkansut in Hebrew. And the prayer plaza is divided already at this plan between 2 sections: a smaller one devoted to women and a bigger one which is devoted to men. Everyone is coming from the same entrance, but there is a division between the 2 sections. But this was a temporary plan. And there was a desperate need to find a solution to what to do with the plaza. Now, I'm showing you that there were many plans, dozens of plans. For example, you can see the 1968 Louis Kahn's plan for the Chuvah Synagogue and the Western Wall. Louis Kahn, I'm sure that many of you know him, was a Jewish architect living in Philadelphia. He planned many important synagogues in North America, and he made a very interesting plan of the Chuvah Synagogue in the Jewish Quarter and also the Western Wall Plaza. Another interesting plan was Isamu Noguchi's plan for the Western Wall, 1971. Noguchi was an American architecture, and he planned something very strange, a kind of a black stone that will be located at the front of the Western Wall. These are few of the options that were discussed after 1967. How shall we develop the Western Wall? But it was this plan, Moshe Sfadia's plan of 1973, that was chosen by the government of Israel to be implemented in the Western Wall. What Moshe Sfadia planned was to build a series of plazas that will go down and down towards the Western Wall and the surface of the Second Temple period street that should be exposed. This is another angle of his plan of the Western Wall area. As we know, this plan was never adopted I think the reason for that was that it was too risky for the religious authorities, Ministry of Religious Affairs. It was too risky. They didn't want that. And in reality, the Western Wall remained as it was exposed, as it was developed after the demolishing of the Mughal neighborhood. And this is the way we know the Western Wall, of course, today. The last thing that I want to show you is the issue or the question of who owns the Western Wall, who has the authority to say what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in the Western Wall, and the issue of division of men and women in this section. These old photos, 19th century old photos of the Western Wall, shows you that there was no division, there was no mechitza between the sexes before 1948, and you can see very clearly that men and women are standing one next to each other at the Western Wall. But it was after the war that it was decided by the Ministry of Religious Affairs that the place will be divided. And you can see this wonderful caricature of Ze'ev, the famous caricaturist, who is writing to us, הפריצה השנייה לכותל, the second break to the Western Wall. And the sign says, under the guardianship of the Ministry of Religious Affairs. So the Ministry of Religious Affairs, Zerach Vahavtik, the minister, he decided to divide the plaza between the two sexes. And these photos of the Western Wall Plaza shows us how gradually the mechitza grew higher and to different corners of the Western Wall. So I'm finishing now my talk about the Western Wall. I wish you a happy Yom Yerushalayim and happy Chag Shavuot, and let's hope that our hostage will be free very, very soon, and will be back until Chag Shavuot. They will be back home safely. Thank you very much.
Toda rabah, Professor Doron Bar. That was fascinating. I've made some notes here. I'd like to now call Dr. Sarah Schwartz, who teaches Bible at Machon Schechter. Not only that, she is the new dean in our graduate school. I don't see her on the screen yet, but I know she's here. Sarah? Okay. Everybody just wait for a minute, please. Here we go. Okay.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I hope you're okay. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, Sarah, we hear you and see you. Thank you.
Okay, so can I share my screen, Josh?
But please, go ahead.
Yes, okay, so 1 second. Okay. I hope you can see that in a minute. 1 sec. Here you go.
Okay.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Very good.
We can. If you can make it
Okay.
larger, Sarah, it would be great.
Yes, I can. 1 second. Here it is. Can you see that?
Perfect. Toda rabah.
Okay, very good. Okay, so thank you very much, Josh. And thank you all. I'm very glad to be here today and to share some reflections as we celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, just began here, and approach Chag Shavuot in just a week from now. So I will discuss today the biblical aspect of Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments, and Ma'amad Har Sinai, the revelation at Sinai in the book of Exodus, Sefer Shmot. But I would like to begin with a paragraph written by Ramban, the Nachmanides, the 13th century commentator, in the introduction to his commentary on the book of Exodus. And I quote, I hope you can see it. The book of Shmot was set apart for the story of the first exile, which had been clearly decreed in the redemption therefrom. This is why he reverted and began this second book of the Torah with the names of those persons who went down to Egypt and mentioned their total number, although this had already been written. Now the exile was not completed until the day they returned to their place and were restored to the status of their fathers. When they left Egypt, even though they came forth from the house of bondage, Beit Avadim, they were still considered exiles because they were in a land that is not theirs, entangled in the desert. When they came to Mount Sinai and made the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and God caused his divine presence to dwell again amongst them, they returned to the status of their fathers. Then they were considered redeemed. It was for this reason that this second book of the Torah is concluded with the consummation of the building of the tabernacle and the glory of the eternal filling it always. These words highlight the central importance of the revelation at Mount Sinai in the biblical theology. It is the ultimate purpose of the Exodus from Egypt. Or, to borrow the words of Professor Benjamin Zomer, a biblical scholar from JTS, the revelation at Mount Sinai, the liberation from Egyptian slavery, and the promise of the land together created the combination of religion and ethnicity that we now call Judaism, Yahadut. So in our discussion today, we will take a close look at the story of the revelation at Mount Sinai, Ma'amad Har Sinai, as it appears in the book of Exodus. I will not touch the repetition of this event in the book of Deuteronomy. And our guiding questions are, what role does this event play in the biblical narrative? Why were the Ten Commandments given specifically at this moment? How do they relate to the rest of the commandments in the Torah, mitzvot? And what is the connection between the revelation at Sinai, Ma'amad Har Sinai, the Ten Commandments, Aseret HaDibrot, and Shavuot, which in Jewish tradition is known as Chag Matan Torah? So these are questions, and I will begin with reading the biblical text itself. We are in Exodus chapters 19:16 to 20:14. And I will read the text in Hebrew, but with small skips, but you can follow along in English translation. It's the ESV translation on the slide in front of you, okay? So I'm reading in Hebrew, but you have the verses in English. ויהי ביום השלישי, בהיות הבוקר, ויהי קולות וברקים וענן כבד על ההר, וקול שופר חזק מאוד, ויחרד כל העם אשר במחנה. Verse 17. ויוצא משה את העם לקראת האלוהים מן המחנה, והתייצבו בתחתית ההר. והר סיני עשן כולו, מפני אשר ירד עליו אדוני באש, והיה על עשנו כאשן הכבשן, ויחרד כל ההר מאוד. ויהי קול השופר הולך וחזק מאוד. משה ידבר, והאלוהים יעננו בקול. I skip to 20 verse 1. וידבר אלוהים את כל הדברים האלה לאמור. אנוכי, אדוני אלוהיך, אשר הוצאתיך מארץ מצרים מבית עבדים. לא יהיה לך אלוהים אחרים על פניי. לא תעשה לך פסל וכל תמונה אשר בשמיים ממעל, ואשר בארץ מתחת, ואשר במים מתחת לשמיים. מתחת לארץ, לא תשתחווה להם ולא תעבדם. כי אנוכי אדוני אלוהיך אל קנו, פוקד עוון אבות על בנים על שילשים ועל ריבעים לשונאי, verse 5, ועושה חסד לאלפים לאוהבי ולשומרי מצוותיי. לא תישא את שם אדוני אלוהיך לשווא, כי לא ינקה אדוני את אשר יישא את שמו לשווא. זכור את יום השבת לקדשו. 6 ימים תעבוד ועשית כל מלאכתך, ויום השביעי שבת לאדוני אלוהיך. לא תעשה כל מלאכה, אתה ובנך וביתך, עבדך ואמתך ובהמתך אשר בשעריך, כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, את הים ואת כל אשר בם, וינח ביום השביעי. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו. verse 11. כבד את אביך ואת אמך, למען יאריכון ימיך על האדמה, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך, לא תרצח, לא תנאף, לא תגנוב, לא תענה ברעך את שקר, לא תחמוד בית רעך, לא תחמוד אשת רעך ועבדו ואמתו ושורו וחמורו, וכל אשר לרעך. And last verse, וכל העם רואים את הקולות, ואת הלפידים ואת קול השופר ואת הער השן, וירא העם, וינועו, ויעמדו מרחוק. So this passage, I have to admit, is among the most challenging in the entire Torah. Numerous, endless interpretations have been offered to resolve the question of where Moshe, God, and the people were situated during the event. It is unclear. Unfortunately, we will not be able to address these complexities today due to time constraints. Instead, I will focus on what is clear in this narrative. The public revelation at Mount Sinai was marked by thunder, fire, and a trembling mountain, a scene that evoked both fear and profound reverence, despite the careful preparations that preceded it. In other words, it was a powerful, overwhelming, and dangerous encounter with the divine. Actually, God took the risk, addressing the entire nation directly so that they could hear his words for themselves. So this indicates that the revelation was of the utmost significance and that the words delivered through it were regarded as exceptionally sacred. The writing of these words on stone tablets by God himself, be'etzba Elohim, further underscores their importance. So one might naturally assume that these divine words are entirely unique. Surprisingly, however, they are not exclusive to the revelation at Mount Sinai, with the exception of the final commandment, lo tin'af, you shall not covet. Each of the 10 commandments appears elsewhere in the Torah and often multiple times. And I will just show a few examples to illustrate that. So, Anochi Hashem Elohecha, Anochi Adonai Elohecha appears in Exodus 20:19, right after the narrative regarding the revelation. In Exodus 34:14, in Exodus 34:17, in Leviticus 19:4, and etc., etc. Lo tisa et shem Adonai Elohecha l'shav appears in Leviticus 6:5 and in Leviticus 19:12. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho, the commandment to observe Shabbat, is repeated in Exodus many times, and also in Numbers 15:32, Mekoshesh ha'etzim, one that gathers sticks on Shabbat. Honoring one's parents, kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, appears again in Exodus 21:15, Exodus 21:17, Leviticus 19:3, ish imo ve'aviv tirau. Lo tirtzach, the prohibition of murder, is found in Exodus 21:12, again, right after the revelation at Mount Sinai, Leviticus 24:21, and in many other places in the Bible, in the Torah. Lo tin'af appears in Leviticus 18, very famous verse, Leshetamitecha lo titen shechbetcha lezera. Leviticus 20, ish asher in'af et eshet ish. Deuteronomy 22:22, ki yimatzeh ish shochev im isha ve'ulat ba'al. So this appears very often in the Bible. Lo tignov, the prohibition of theft, is addressed again in Exodus 21:16, Leviticus 19:11, Deuteronomy 34, and the prohibition of bearing false witness is found again in Exodus 23:1 and in Deuteronomy 19:16-21. So these words are not exclusive to this event. This is one observation we must we must say. Another common assumption is that the Ten Commandments encompass all biblical legal categories. In fact, however, they do not correspond to specific legal or ritual categories. I hope you know that there is no ritual aspect in the Ten Commandments. In fact, we see no purity law or sacrificial worship. Rather, the Ten Commandments stand apart from concrete national or social context. And a third assumption might be that these represent the gravest sin, the most horrible sins from a biblical perspective. But if that were the case, so we could expect the commandments to be accompanied by corresponding sanctions, such as mot yamut, v'tikaret hanefesh hahi, etc. However, they are presented in absolute terms. Lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, you shall not, yes? So we call this, what scholars refer to this as apodictic laws, in contrast to casuistic laws, which are case-based. If something happened, then XYZ, and typically include specific punishment. That most of the laws in the Torah are articulated in the casuistic phrasing. But here, the Ten Commandments are unique, and they are not accompanied by any sanction at all. They stated with no attached punishment. We don't know from these words what is the punishment for a man that took life of another person. There's no sanction. So this leads us to the key question. What sets the Ten Commandments apart? Why were these specific words chosen to stand at the heart of God's encounter with Israel at Mount Sinai and to be engraved on the stone tablets? So to begin addressing this question, we must take a closer look at the nature of the revelation at Sinai, and I will take you to the biblical verses that precedes the revelation in Exodus 19, 1-6. Again, I will read the Hebrew verses, and you can follow the English translation. בחודש השלישי, לצאת בני ישראל מארץ מצרים ביום הזה, באו מדבר סיני, ויסעו מרפידים, ויבואו מדבר סיני, ויחנו במדבר, ויחן שם ישראל נגד ההר, verse 3. ומשה עלה אל האלוהים, ויקרא אליו אדוני מן ההר לאמור, כה תאמר לבית יעקב, ותגד לבני ישראל, אתם ראיתם אשר עשיתי למצרים, ואשא אתכם על כנפי נשרים, ואביא אתכם אליי, ועתה אם שמוע תשמעו בקולי, ושמרתם את בריתי, והייתם לסגולה מכל העמים, כי לי כל הארץ. ואתם, this is verse 6, תהיו לי ממלכת כהנים וגוי קדוש, אלה הדברים אשר תדבר אל בני ישראל. So God defines the relationship with Israel as a ברית. עתה אם שמוע תשמעו וקולי ושמרתם את בריתי. And the question is, what is exactly a brit in the Bible? What is the etymology? Josh, should I say etymology? I can hear you.
Yes, etymology is perfect.
Etymology, I wasn't sure. So what is the etymology of this word? So let's take a look. Let's take a look at this word. And I will begin with the suggestion that the Hebrew noun brit is derived from the verb bara, which means in Hebrew to eat. And probably the explanation for this is because the word bara, to eat, it refers to the meal that often accompanied the formalization of an agreement between two parties. You can find this, for example, in Genesis 26, when Yitzchak is eating a meal with the Philistines after he established a covenant between them. But another possibility, which seems more reasonable, is that the Hebrew word brit is etymologically related to the Akkadian word biritu, which means grasp or hold. In this sense, brit would be associated with the notion of binding or holding fast, paralleling related terms such as riksu in Akkadian and ishiyul in Hittite, both of which denote a binding agreement or obligation. From this perspective, the root bara in Hebrew may be connected to verbs such as shava or asar, which carry connotations of captivity or restraint. This interpretation likely underlies the phrase in Yechezkel, Ezekiel 20:37, ועברתי אתכם תחת השבת, והבאתי אתכם במסורת הברית. So, במסורת הברית, commonly translated as under the bond of the covenant. You can see this on the screen. This is the ESV translation, the NRSV, the KJV. All the translations suggest that, but I think it may be better understood as במסורת הברית, referring to a form of restraint or confinement. This reading aligns with the Aramaic, asar, meaning to bind or to tie. So based on this explanation, Brit likely conveys loyalty and commitment rather than a legal agreement or contract. In both Akkadian and Hittite, the term corresponding to Brit is distinct from those used for contracts between equals. Instead, Brit typically denotes, Riksu and Ishiyul, a hierarchical relationship, hierarchical, I think I should say, a relationship, hierarchy, often modeled on a vassal treaty, a covenant between a sovereign and subordinate king that demands mutual but unequal loyalty. So such covenants, Britot, have survived primarily from the Hittite Empire in the 13th century BCE. Scholar study of these treaties, especially of Moshe Weinfeld, an Israeli scholar, very famous Israeli scholar, alav shalom, has shown that they typically include several recurring elements. Most of them appear in the Sinai Covenant. All those treaties, all those covenants, starts with historical prologue, which establishes the relationship between the sovereign and the subordinate. Then we find stipulations or commandments which are concrete laws phrased in apodictic styles. Yes, absolute phrasing, and in the second guf sheni. I'm sorry if I see that a word is missing. Blessing, and the third element is blessing, and sometimes curses, promises to protection and warning of consequences for disobedience. And then there is a ritual confirmation. The covenant is sealed through a ceremonial act and placed in the sanctuary, in the temple. And lastly, there is a communal acceptance. The people express collective assent in the first person plural. So we find there's elements in the Sinai revelation, and that could explain this the resemblance to the model of ancient Near Eastern treaties that explain and clarify some key features of the biblical text. For example, the historical prologue, Anochi Hashem Elohecha asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim. And it could also explain the breaking of the tablets by Moshe at the scene of the golden calf, the Chet HaEgel. Moshe did not, I will read, כאשר קרב אל המחנה וירא את העגל ומחולות ויחר אף משה וישלך מידיו את הלוחות וישבר אותם תחת ההר. Moshe broke the tablets as a deliberate and culturally recognized act known in Akkadian as tupam hepum, which means to break the tablets. It's a formal gesture of annulment of a commandment. The violation of the very first commandment, Anochi Hashem Elohecha, I am the Lord your God, necessitated the destruction of the covenant document itself. And also Ibn Ezra observed this in his commentary from the 12th century BC, the 12th century. So, however, to me, the most significant implication concern the status of the Ten Commandments is that they are not ordinary commandments, but rather conditions for entering the covenant. And this is the most important observation to me. The Ten Commandments are not regular laws. Their status is totally different. And they meant to say that anyone who wishes to join the covenant with the God of Israel must meet the standard set by these commandments. So I think in modern terms, we should not take them as laws, but more as a constitution. And that also could explain some of the characters that we found at the Ten Commandments. First of all, you see that they apply to every individual, regardless of national, personal, or social circumstances, time, or place. Everybody are obliged to preserve them. They are formulated primarily in negative terms, and even the positive commandments like Shavuot Yom Yerushalayim and Kabed et Avicha v'et Imecha means to restrain the negative form. The formulation is concrete and practical. It's not abstract theology. It's not a philosophical reasoning. It's concrete, and you have to take an action. The apodictic style reflects the non-legal nature of the text, and the formulation is short and typologically structured around the number 10 in order for everybody to remember those 10 commandments. Now, I think that these observation takes us to distinctive nature of Sinai covenant. First of all, it emphasizes the idea of God's kinship and what we call Malchut Shamayim, which inherently set up the basic tension, if not an opposition, toward centralized human authority that could explain the antagonism for human kinship in the Bible later on. And second, I think the Ten Commandments are divided into two sections in order to focus on the ethical aspect. The first group is reflect Israel's unique relationship with the Lord of Israel, God. But the second section shifts to ethical sphere, underscores that God's concerns lie not only in the people's fidelity to him, but also in the moral fabric of human relationship with the community. I see that time runs, so I will just say just a few words to sum up our ideas. I will first want to relate Psalm 15. It's a very famous psalm. Hashem yagur ba'alecha, mishkan behar kodshecha. I think it's a good example of a poetic interpretation of this idea that demands conditions from somebody who wants to enter the temple. Who could enter God's mountain? It's only a person that הולך תמים, פועל צדק ודובר אמת בלשונו, ושלא עשה לרעהו רעה, that he does no evil to his neighbor. And from this, I would just want to follow like very quickly on, I think, of the development of this idea in the biblical era and in Second Temple era. So when we find, and I would like to answer the question, what is the connection between the Ten Commandments, the revelation at Sinai, and Chag HaShavuot, as I asked before. So we found in Exodus 19 that the event in Mount Sinai occurred in the third new moon, B'chodesh HaShlishi. And in the book of Jubilees, Sefer HaYovlim, it's written that they renewed the covenant every year in the third month in Chodesh Sivan. So we think in the biblical era, what happened, the thing that happened, the event that happened every year is the annual renewal of the covenant, which is also very much similar to the custom in the ancient Near East to renew the covenant every year. And this could be reflected also in Psalm 81, which we used to say in the tefillah on Rosh Hashanah, tik'u b'chodesh shofar, b'kesel leyom chagenu, verses 4 and 5. But actually, I think it was dedicated originally to the Chag HaShavuot, the renewal of the covenant. They made an oath again, and that's why they talk about Chok LiYisrael v'Mishpat LeEloi Yaakov, because they were making a new oath, another oath, a renewed oath in this event. And then after, in the Second Temple period, Yosef ben Matityahu testified that it calls Atzeret, and Chazal in Seder Olam Rabbah decided that the giving of the Torah happened in the 6th of the third month in Vav Sivan, and it somehow was connected to the Shavuot, the biblical Shavuot of counting the days from Pesach to the 49, 7 times 7, 49 days. So Josh, do I have a few more minutes or should I finish now? I just wanted to...
Let's hear what you have to say and we'll stick
Okay,
around for
so
another
I
minute
just
or two.
wanted to mention that during the years, somehow the Shavuot festival, I don't know how it was actually happened, but many tradition reenacting the Sinai revelation as a new revelation. For example, we have a very famous story on Rabbi Yosef Karo in Tzfat, 16th century, that had a mystical experience during Tikkun Chatzot and Shavuot. And what is mostly interesting is that Shai Agnon wrote a very famous story called The Sign, Hasiman, which describes a mystical experience of him in Chag HaShavuot. So I don't know if I have time to read it. I actually found a translation to this very, very interesting narrative. So because it's 8:30 at night, so I do not want to waste your time. I will just mention that he was sitting in the shul in Shavuot at night, and he was very, very upset because at this day specifically, he heard about the horrible events that happened to his city in the Second World War. And he was very, very upset, and he was sitting very sadly in the shul. And all of a sudden, he had a revelation of Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Gabirol that spoke with him in the shul from the ark, from the Aron of the Sefer Torah. And he wrote beautifully how he shaped it just one by one, the verses from Exodus. And the thing that is very important and which are very moving is that Rabbi Shimon Ibn Gvirol saw that he was very upset, and he tried to help him and cheer him up. So he made him a siman, a sign for him to remember his city. And he wrote a poem with an acrostic of the name of his town. So this is the amazing story of Shai Agnon, and you're very much invited to read it. I can send it to Josh. I have the whole translation, and I would like to thank you. for your patience, and to wish we all Chag Sameach. Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you very much, everybody.
Dr. Schwartz and everybody, Sarah, thank you so very much for those words of encouragement, those words that take us to another place and make us think. I want to thank everybody for joining us. If you would like to get the transcript, we're putting this out later this week so you can review and listen and watch. A lot of great things from all three presentations from our faculty at Schechter. Thank you so very much. Everybody should have a wonderful Yom Yerushalayim, a wonderful Shavuot, and may we see sooner our hostages come back safe and sound. Amen.
Amen.
Toda rabah, and thank you, everybody.